My name is Doris Marie Lindsay. I just had a grandchild named after me. My name before I married, N-E-E, was Doris Hopkins. I was called Hopalong by a few creative people. I was born in Duval, Oklahoma, in the home as far as I can remember. And it was an exciting town at one time when my dad, when I was a little baby, but it had 4,000 people, about 5 banks, and it's just a hole in the road right now. But I could go see my grandmother and sleep with the hot water bottle and do all those kinds of things. So I remember they called it the Boom Town. I never would have known that if my uncle hadn't told me.
How do you spell that? The name of the town?
D-E-V-O-L. Duval. Weird. But anyway, as I grew up, a lot of things came into my mind, but we had a toilet in the backyard, and it wasn't right next door. You had to walk around the corner and go. And I remember looking for spiders when you were out there in the barn or the toilet. But and a lot of other people had those back in those days, because my neighbors built new houses. My dad did, but the money ran out, and you had to wait a while to put in the bathroom. But it was put in later. There were no telephones, except in town. That came years and years later. And I can remember my mother made me a blue dress made out of cotton, wrinkly cotton that you had to iron, and the school bus was stuck in the mud. And being the helping person that I am, I got out in back, the driver asked us to, and said, would you mind pushing the bus? And I didn't want to say, this is a brand new dress that my mother just made me. So when I'm walking up the hill, I can remember, this is not good, because I was covered with mud from head to foot, and hair, face, everything. But anyway, I did my duty to the bus driver. And I can remember the smell of boiling water with a chicken dipped in it. And Mother would say, would you go pick the chicken? And you pick the feathers. There is no worse smell than boiled chicken feathers. In my life, I don't think I've ever seen anything.
How did you do that? You dip the chicken, the whole chicken with the feathers into hot water.
Right.
And then you
pick it out.
You just rub it off, or
you had to pick.
Yeah.
They'd stick, so you had to pick. But anyway, I worked in Burt Burnett, lived in Oklahoma and worked in Burt Burnett, and that was exotic to me to think about going to a town in Texas and working. But I can recall doing inventory for the boss in my high school years, and somebody said, why do you always choose her to do inventory? And he said, she has a knack with names, meaning that I could pronounce things I never heard of, is what his point. He said it's faster. So that was one of my first outside compliments outside of my family. And let's see, I worked in the gift section at the drugstore, and also sold various and sundry items, as my friend Prentice would say. And
how old were you?
I was my freshman, sophomore, junior, senior weekend in high school. And I'd drive from about 9 miles from our house over to Burt Burnett. But anyway, now let's see. Did I lose my train of thought? Okay, I'm working at the Boomtown Rodeo, and because you serve so many people when Boomtown comes in Burt Burnett, Texas, you have to kind of be hurried. And so they said, now Doris, when you're making the sodas and the things, the only one I can remember really is they'll understand you if you say jerk 5 wild, but if you say 5 cherry cokes, it just blows the mind. So you remember, we had a certain language we had to talk during the Boomtown Rodeo days. And I met Joe when I was a sophomore, or between my sophomore and junior years, and the first words he said to me were, if you won't let him take you home, will you let me take you home? And the reason being, I was dating a boy that he knew, and all 5 boys were in the same car. So when I got off work, he said that. He asked me that, and I said, I'm sorry, neither one, because my dad was already over there to pick me up. And I had no idea. I had such a sense of loyalty, but I said, my dad's over here. I can't, can't do that. But I never forgot his first words to me. I thought, boy, he's kind of cute. And so anyway, that was my exciting times.
You were a sophomore in high school or college?
Well, no,
High
sophomore
school.
in high school, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior years on weekends, and then in summers. So I was a woman about town when I worked at the drugstore. But anyway, I can recall growing up during my high school years, walking down, having girls home for a slumber party, and we would walk down during the night or early morning over to the neighbor's house about a mile, and she would cook breakfast for us every time. And that was exciting. I loved to have slumber parties. And I can recall my dad going to D-Ball, where my grandmother lived, and my dad would come home with candy. Each Friday he'd come home with a sack full of candy in a manila envelope. I do not know why that envelope, maybe that's why I'm so fascinated with paper today, I don't know. But I do recall that was an exciting thing. I remember when I was about a sophomore also, going over to my grandmother Robin's house over by a Piatone, it's an Indian name, and having my hand up on the door facing, and someone said, don't move, Doris, don't move, and got the broom and killed a centipede. In case you have not seen one, they are ferocious looking little furry things with, I believe, 100 legs. I think they're famous for that.
A bunch.
Ew.
How long was
The thought of it nowadays.
How long was it?
About this long.
It was a big one.
Yeah, but it's big and round and fat with all the legs, so yes, it was. In 1953, I'm just jumping around, but I believe I'm through with my early days there. But in 1953, I jumped off a horse. I had kind of pestered my brother. Oh, let me ride the horse home, let me ride the horse home. And I had walked to Randlett, my hometown, where I graduated from high school. And I had walked, and Bobby said, now, Doris, I don't know, that cinch is just a bit torn. You have to walk him home. And I said, I will. But I rode out to the corner, and when the horse knew he was going 2.5 miles home, the cinch, the saddle slipped. And I went around the corner, and it was my first real thought that God had spoken to me in an unusual way, because as the horse ran, it was known for its running. I believe they're called paint or pinto ponies, the Indians called. And in my mind, a tape ran through, and it said, your only chance when you're on a horse to save your life is to jump. And I didn't question it, I jumped. And I know now, I look back and I know it was God. And I firmly believe in my mind that my life was saved right then. I spent one night in the hospital with a goose egg on the top of my head. But that was quite an exciting adventure, and of course scared my parents to pieces. But my neighbor had found, my brother's friend was named Bill Kirkpatrick. He came by and found me wandering down the road with a bloody scarf and just out. I don't even remember him picking me up. So I really feel it could have been much, much worse. My dad and mother were fairly laid-back people, I would say. My dad was, they both were wonderful parents, but my dad was absolutely one of the greatest men I have ever known. I know that in retrospect, and knew it at the time, actually. And the neighbor boy, my sister-in-law said one time later to me, he knew your dad. And I said, what about my dad? And she told me that he said, Bruce Hopkins was the finest man I have ever known. And he knew him for years and years and years. So that says what I think about my father right there. One time well, before I tell this, let me say that Joe bought me a new sewing machine. And I put it on a cedar chest in my mother's bedroom. I had made Debbie a dress, and it was brand new. Woke up one day, and it was gone. A gun was gone out of the closet, and a sewing machine, and it was hard to believe, but my brother found out that his best friend and another boy had gone in and ransacked more than one farm. And anyway, that was one sewing machine less, for sure, for me for 2 or 3 years. But one day when I was, one Saturday night, I had worked and we got off and we're going back to Carol Hooper's house. Carol Hooper lived over by Randlett, out in the country the other way. And we, 3 girls were dropped first, and that was Zeta, Shirley, Zeta, Bet, and me. And we went into the house acting silly as girls do and talking about and giggling. I remember that. And we turned off the kitchen light, and because nothing ever happens out in the country. And we walked around in the first bedroom, and I said, "Oh, look at there, the blind's open. Wouldn't it be funny if somebody's peeking in at us?" And we giggled right then. And simultaneously, as we giggled, we heard the front door open. And so we quietly got into the closet, and we didn't breathe for the next, till the other girls got home. It must have been 15 minutes. And we heard someone go into the kitchen, open the cabinet, get a glass, turn the faucet on, and all that good stuff, and clean the glass, leave it on a towel there, and we're petrified, absolutely petrified. And I was afraid to even touch my friend's hand, because if I did, then we'd forget and say something out loud. Never did find out who it was. It wasn't anybody's father, or it was just one of those phenomenons. No one, they said it couldn't be. But Mrs. Hooper said, "I believe you. I know that you heard someone come in the house." So anyway, she made us feel a little bit better. When we heard the girls, we just passed out on the bed. By the way, I was taking a music lesson, a voice lesson, when I jumped off that horse. I just want my children to know that. Thank you very much. And let's see. Senior play. I remember the senior play, and about the British lady had a maid, and all I had to do was get on the stage, and I was turned on, so to speak. And I recall that I put my heart and soul into that few lines that I had, 2 times in the play. But one I shall never forget, and it was, "Oh, Miss Prissy, I begged you on my bended prayer bones, will you take me out of this here place?" And everybody laughed. It must have been fairly good, I don't know. But I never shall forget it anyway. I can recall craving Dixie dogs with Debbie. I could not get the corn dogs that just came out. And I was absolutely enraptured with corn dogs. And so Joe would have to go out. 2 o'clock one morning, I couldn't stand it. I said, "Will you take me down the street and get me one?" He goes to the store, buys a deep fryer, and the oil or whatever, and a package of stuff, and the cornbread mix to make it with. So henceforth, I got no more babying about that. I had to make my own Dixie dogs. But when we first married, Joe was to teach me how to make, quote, French fries. And I said, "Well, I think I know how to do that." But what I didn't realize was that back in those days, the pans were more or less aluminum, and they were lightweight. It was lighter than anything my mother had. So the oil is boiling hot. The French fries go in, and all of a sudden the pan goes up in the air, comes down on the floor. I'm covered with a residue of grease and French fries all over. I shall never forget it. I do not believe Joe helped me clean that up. And as it was his suggestion, I often thought I missed my opportunity there. I recall in about 1962, I think only had Debbie, Bruce, and Laurie, and I found a fake worm somewhere. I don't recall where, and it wasn't too big, and was rather flat, but the idea came that I wanted to put that into Joe's iced tea. In those days, you did not put a worm into Joe's iced tea. And so I told the kids, don't look guilty. Just, I don't recall if Debbie remembers that or not. But I said, whatever you do, just act normal. And then I got the realization that, what if he turns and throws the glass of tea all over us, because that was the first time I put my children in on a joke. But finally, I said, is the tea good today? He began to get suspicious finally. But I just was so tired waiting on Joe to see the worm in the tea and get the reaction. And he said, that's not too funny, when he saw it. And I thought, that was kind. For Joe back then, that was kind. Because Joe had a sort of a weak stomach, maybe I could call it that. We went to Casper one time. I went with some ladies, I recall, and Joe had changed one diaper, Laurie's. And when we drove up, he was out in the backyard throwing up, may I say. I don't recall they'd ever changed another diaper. But things really did get to him then. But I think if I had said, I believe you'll get used to it, he could have changed a few more. But back then, men didn't change diapers, I think. Let's see. I would be remiss if I did not say that the greatest thing that has ever happened to me in my life is answered prayer. I have to tell the two high points of what made me what I am today, if that is desirable. In Wyoming, we were keeping a mail route for the preacher. That gave him an extra few dollars. So until the new preacher got there, I was to drive the mail route out in the foothills of Wyoming. And, several miles. But no gravel. We're talking when it rained, after a certain point, the roads were horrible. And I remember having a flat on a bright sunny day. And I said, I had prayed a prayer saying, a while back before that, I had said, Lord, will you teach me how to pray? That's what I want to know more than anything. And so I got the jack out. I recalled that Joe, I could see it in my mind. Now, Joe does this and Joe does that. Okay, possibly I'm doing this right. And then I realized I really was doing it right. I had everything in order, and I'm pumping. The car is sitting. And I know that I've done it right. So did you ever want to argue with the Lord about anything? I found out right fast that you really do. I said, Lord, I'm sorry, I didn't ask. I just had an attitude of, you're going to take care of this. I didn't specifically ask you, will you show me how to do this tire? And the words went through again like a tape. Just raise it a little higher. And I said, but Lord, just like that. Oh, forgive me, Lord, forgive me. Okay, raise it a little higher. You see, the reason I started to argue with the Lord was I couldn't get it any higher. I was already doing it that I thought. And so I thought, okay, piece of cake. I changed the tire, which shows that had I argued with the Lord about it and just said, I'm doing the best I can, I never would have gotten the tire changed. But anyway, and I recall another one when I took my children. This is in about 1964. I'm not sure about that. Connie, Lisa was a baby, I believe. And I recall being fascinated with throwing out the laying of the fleece, or throwing out the fleece. You know, God, will you do this by a certain time or whatever, like Gideon did in the Bible. Anyway, if the fleece was wet, he did one thing. If it was dry, he did another thing. And so we went to the Blackwood Brothers Quartet. My kids and me. Joe went back to Casey, Wyoming, which is towards Sheridan, Wyoming, and it was quite some ways away. But my prayer had been, I knew God was going to answer. I knew it. I can't explain to you how I knew, except the Holy Spirit, but I did know it. And we were at the concert, and I recall thinking, He's selling that land, because you see, what you don't know is that when I asked the Lord to do it, I said, and you're going to do it by April 1st. I may have my date wrong there, but April or May 1st. And that was the day. If He didn't do it that night, God was not going to answer that. And so I couldn't wait for Joe to get home. And he said, don't tell anyone. The Lord instructed me, do not tell Joe, do not, this is how you learn to pray, by not doing. And anyway, Joe came home. Now, we didn't have a telephone back then. And Joe came home, and I thought, he was going over. Let me preface it, I should have prefaced it with this. Joe was going over to try to sell the land. He had no inkling at all that anybody wanted anything. And when he got there, a man wanted it, and by 8 o'clock it was sold. Now that even adds to the flavor of it, I think. But then I could tell many, many stories about my grandchildren, boys or girls. But I recall Bo and Brett were there one time, and they had their dog. Had two dogs, I believe. One, they were trying to get under the fence to take out, so to speak, the geese that Joe was keeping for another man. There were two geese, and Brett. I was in the bed with the flu, had a robe on. Brett runs to the door and says, "Grammy, the dog's going to eat the geese. He's going to eat the geese." And I said, "Okay." And I'm battle shocked, or whatever you want to call it. And I told Brett, I said, get the lawnmower and get concrete blocks on it and take them up there, put them at this hole, that hole, then go back and get two more. Anything you can carry, because the hole was there, and we had to cover one hole so that we could get around. And I had to put my head on the dog's head to keep him from coming through while they're going to try to sneak a concrete block. But it only had... is funny to the one who is telling it, namely me, because you're on the bed sick, and you have to get up and do all this stuff. Hold the dog's head down with your foot. Let me see. I remember one thing that I know everybody in the family knows this, but one thing that stands out is when Megan was a senior, she said, "I don't know about this, Grammy, dating your best friend who was a boy. I don't know about this. I've heard that you don't like it when you date your best friend." Anyway, she called me at 11:30 that night, 11 o'clock that night, and she said, "Grammy, this movie was demon possessed." I can't recall the name. She had no idea. She didn't know. She was not a television watcher at that time, and not very much of except for old movies. That darn cat. She liked That Darn Cat. But Megan said, "Grammy this and Grammy that," and she just absolutely carried on and carried on. And I said, "Megan, are you all right?" And she said, "I'm out here in the hall calling." And she said, "I will never, ever go to a movie with those people in it again. And I watched it later to see, and she was absolutely correct. Absolutely. She said, I want to be like you. And I said, now, wait a minute now. You don't really want to be like me. You want to be, not, she said, exactly. And I said, no, you don't want to be me exactly. Because everybody, God made everybody different. But what you want to do is have the faith that I have. Yeah, that's what I want. So anyway, she's had a life of some pain along the way, but she was the oldest, 17 years before we ever had any more grandchildren. And then I told Joe, I talk to Joe all the time, even though he's in heaven. He would be so happy to see that he may have 3 little grandgirls. We'll stay tuned for the next one. And I have taken too long, but a couple of other things have popped into my mind. And I want to say that my son-in-law is taping this. And he was nice enough not to stop it for some reason. I don't know if that's good or bad. But that's some of the things. My grandmothers were women of faith. And I would not be here today. Really, physically, I believe, if 2 times he had not intervened in my life. And I'm grateful, and I want my children to all have the same thing that I had. Thank you so much. The end.